Okay, so number 4 is a bit of the so what. Here we have this globalized innovation world in a sense, and so what? Well, the so what is it creates new sets of dynamics that countries, geographies, businesses, entrepreneurs, citizens who understand it can benefit from, okay? So first of all, it's a perception issue. When this wonderful photograph got taken in the 70s in one of the Apollo missions, the Club of Rome got established around the same time because Aurelio Pesci said, it is a spaceship. We have to think about resources like systems thinkers. We are stewards of the planet. We have to, do something about it. And I would argue that the same kind of phenomenon is now happening in the innovation realm because when you look at the key ingredients of innovation, financial capital, idea capital, human capital, they're not an infinite supply either. And we have to be smart stewards of what, in some respects, is becoming, I'm very proud of that graphic, a global brain, okay? And this was foreshadowed by a very interesting book that I discovered recently by none other than H.G. Wells, who in 1938 wrote a book called The World Brain. Now, he was referring to something that was, in a way, the very early precursor of Wikipedia. And it's quite a remarkable historical artifact for those of you that fancy history of science kinds of issues. But I think that it really points to this notion that as innovation becomes a global phenomenon, it relates to 3 basic phenomena that in turn create new dynamics, which in turn create new opportunities. The first of those 3 is the notion of digital everything, right? So, there's a discussion in Canada, I know, about how much ICT is the right amount and how much more to have and so forth and so on. I mean, while you have that discussion, the world is moving at flank speed to becoming wired up, equivalent to a brain, a human brain. So the rate of data production is going up dramatically. 5 exabytes of, this is Eric Schmidt from Google, who said 5 exabytes of data were created between the dawn of man and 2003. Now the same amount is created every 2 days. Okay, internet traffic is going up 5 times by 2013. The number of devices connected to the internet, these are not RFID chips, which are in the billions, but devices are going up by 4 times over the next decade. 5 billion cell phones, 25% of which are smart, et cetera, et cetera. And amusing statistic I found in a CSIRO report yesterday, which is that there are as many semiconductors now on the planet as there are ants. I don't know how they did that analysis, but they made that assertion. But it tells you something about the proliferation of technology. And so digital everything then creates a world where the ability to connect becomes enhanced. So if you remember 1997, no real commercial internet, no smartphones, no digital music, no DVRs, no social networking, no digital voice, no digital cameras, no digital movies, right? Just 12 or 13 years ago. That is an index of the degree of change that we are all experiencing, which is contributing to this notion of the innovation world. The second dynamic is that we're really talking about the opportunity to have new kinds of business models. And I call the notion of innovation arbitrage one of the key factors there. So the idea that you have different parts of the world that are pursuing innovation strategies for different reasons at different rates of speed, which also have differences in how they value tangible assets, that have different states of market development, that have different cost structures of doing business, that have different demand functions, that have different sets of local enablers, and that are able to pursue opportunities with different rates of speed, means that if you understand deeply what's going on in this innovation world, this becomes an engine for value creation of historic proportions, right? Because we're not in one thin layer of homogeneous capability. We're in a world that's highly differentiated, where smart people can then say, oh, innovation is actually a whole sequence of tasks, ranging from the discovery phase, which is the eureka, I have found it phase, all the way to deployment and rollout. And if you start to deconstruct the value web for innovation, Benihana-like, So, we do the management in Palo Alto, but the medicinal chemistry in Bangalore, and the clinical trials in Gdansk. All of a sudden, people who can play that game of innovation arbitrage will be way ahead of the curve. And some countries, some cultures have the cultural intelligence and the friendly face to the world that positions them particularly well to do that kind of business model. Wonder who we might be talking about. The third is just the fact of the globalization of innovation and the kind of global culture of enterprise. So this is a cool meeting, and you might say, oh, where is that? Helsinki or Palo Alto? Well, it was Dubai. And I gave a talk at the Dubai Celebration of Entrepreneurship where 2,000 people under the age of 35 came together. They were entrepreneurs, seed investors, looking to it was like San Francisco in the late 90s. It was amazing, right? They all spoke English, and it was as interesting an event as a TED conference, right? So this notion of a global culture of enterprise, English speaking, kind of with a certain set of entrepreneurial values is now becoming a global reality, because this could have also been in Shanghai or, in Bangalore or anywhere else. The other point is that, as we start to create linkages, these are some early pictures of the I-20, now up to 30 members, the whole notion of creating a stewardship function for innovation at a global level means that, in a sense, this game board for innovation is now being better established, right? So that, again, this idea of looking at the new geography of innovation as an engine for value creation, both economic value creation and societal value creation, is becoming more real. And these are all components of this notion of the global brain that I alluded to just a moment ago. So just a few thoughts for Canada, okay? Since we are in Canada and here to talk about Canada to a significant degree. First of all, you need some kind of a story that creates a sense of urgency in order for innovation to really be taken seriously at a societal level. Simply saying to people, it's good, and the more you have of it, the better, and it relates to productivity, which is a little bit abstract for a lot of people. It sounds a little bit like, it's good to eat spinach, or it's good to work out. But my question would be, what are the muscles for? And the muscles are partly to avoid strategic surprise. This is Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, where the guy looking at the radar screen, because he was captured by the old paradigm, said, those can't be airplanes. There are too many of them. It must be a flock of birds. One of my favorite quotes of all time. And the rest, as they say, is history. So another way of phrasing that point, as I like to often say, is if innovation's the big answer that you're looking for, what is the question? If you go to Finland, they have an answer to the question of why do you have a national agenda? China, they have an answer, right? What's Canada's answer? An important question to be addressed. Related to that is what I call the question or the issue of stewardship, right? So a lot of the reason I wrote Innovation Nation is because I wanted to encourage the development of a more robust stewardship mechanism for innovation in the U.S. Well, what does that mean, really? Well, if you say we want a national agenda, you need to answer some very specific questions. Who's going to do the work? What are their authorities? What kind of funding do they have? What are they allowed to do? What degrees of freedom do they have? What are the expectations? How are you going to measure success? That's stewardship in relation to a strategy, right? Otherwise, what you have, and by steward, I don't mean czar in the sense of a top-down commandant type. I mean more the orchestrator, the enabler, the catalyst, the bridge builder, right? And the social systems that we're talking about, especially public sector systems, are so complicated that kind of integrative influence is really necessary, I think, if one is to have a national innovation agenda. So, stewardship is about, you need buy-in from the top, you need activity from the bottom up, but somebody has to be the middleware. Somebody has to own the idea of developing and pursuing a strategy and being responsible for it. And that is the missing ingredient in most of the places I see that are otherwise well poised to be on this journey of a national innovation agenda. So it also has to do with culture. And culture has to do with how much uncertainty, how much tolerance of risk, how much acceptance of failure you're willing to have as part of your values, right? And we know that values are a very important component of many societies, Canada not the least, right? So the notion of acceptable risk becomes a very interesting question when it is then expressed in terms of policy or in terms of investment approach and things of this kind. This, of course, is the famous ring toss toy, but it has a very serious purpose here because social psychologists, when they want to measure someone's entrepreneurial potential, will use this test. So now I can kind of, this is a free tip, right? So, if nothing else, this is kind of like hopefully a value add for you when you depart this lunch. So here's what happens. They're looking, and if you're standing right next to the post and kind of throwing the ring like that, that's no good, because obviously you're not being ambitious enough. But if you stand all the way back and you're firing them off like that and hoping they'll land, that's not so good either, right? So finding the optimum, what jazz musicians would call the sweet spot, is an essential part of finding the right risk return equation, your performance on the ring toss, but also, it becomes an important design element for how incentive programs, early stage risk capital, judgments about careers, in terms of how much security versus how much risk, become acceptable in relation to established social values as well as the narrative that leadership puts on society to say, hey, this has been the way it's been, but we have to go somewhere new. So this is the exciting vista or the necessary vista. Now how are people going to respond, right? So culture plays an extremely important role. And all of these, you could argue are what you might call the requirements for having innovation have a seat at the table, so to speak. Because without them, it'll be a buzzword or it'll be just something that people will tell you, oh yeah, we're doing that. We're doing a lot of it. To get there, finally, and just one more point, there's a temptation to assume that there's some kind of universal principles or a set of good practices that you could just kind of draw from to figure out what the Canadian approach is or the Abu Dhabi approach or whatever, or you could hire a few strategy consultants for $10 million and they'd give you, if not the answer, an answer. My message is there is no three-ring binder with the answer. Canada's opportunity as well as responsibility is basically to engage with a set of very interesting and also necessary choices in order to design the innovation system that's going to fit for its particular circumstances today as well as for its destiny in terms of a player, in terms of what I've been calling this new geography of innovation. So with that, let me conclude. Thank you for listening, and I think we have a few minutes for questions.